Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman encounter horror stories. First story, Dogman. I need help figuring out what is happening in my neighborhood. I live in a very secluded, woodsy part of a small southern town. It's really peaceful during the day, but it gets a little messed at night. There's a few houses on my road, but for the most part, it's only trees. There are a few reoccurring events that are all pretty spooky, but the main one is what my friends and I call the Dogman, for lack of a better name. I've only seen it twice in my life. I've lived in this part of town for 3 years. The Dogman has a body shaped like that of a scrawny human. Its bones are very visible. It has fur, but only in patches over its body, sort of like a dog with mange. Though it has the bodily proportions of a person, it has the head of a dog and can run extremely fast. Also, it's huge. It is quadrupedal. To preface, my room is at the front of the house. Our front yard is the size of field. I have the biggest window in the house in my bedroom, and it faces the front yard. I do not have blinds over my window, and my bed is in front of it. The first time I saw the Dogman, it was late at night, and I was sitting in bed. I saw it running through my yard. Shortly after, my cat, who was an indoor-outdoor cat at the time, came inside growling. The cat was found dead across the creek near my yard this July. He had no visible injuries and was very young and healthy. We still don't know how he died. The second time I saw it was earlier tonight. My friend and I were sitting on my porch. We noticed a very large, moving mass on the base of the mountain, which we live right in front of. We decided to get a closer look. My friend stayed behind to watch as my grandfather and I drove down the road to the base of the mountain. I didn't want to drive there alone. As we got near, we stopped in front of the mass. It was a tree. Something then sprinted out from behind it and into the woods to the right of us. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind it was the Dogman. If you have any ideas as to what this is or how I can go about finding out more about it, I'd love to hear them. This is really freaking us out. If you have any questions about details, feel free to ask. Second story, Dogman/Wolfman sighting on the Oregon coast. I've heard of this sort of thing, but only briefly. I have never really thought much of it, nor have I ever done any reasonable research into this. I figured this might be a good place to start. This is a really odd story of how I came to see a literal Dogman 3 nights ago. Around midnight. I live in a neighborhood, by the way, but we are on the edge of a large forest behind our house. So not completely rural. Funny part of the story. So, I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release. I can't stand to harm mice. It triggered at midnight, and the loud pop of the door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires and didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So, I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard by my house, I always go about 3 miles away into a forested area. I'm not cruel enough to just release him by someone else's house, thus causing them a mouse problem. Irrelevant info, I know. Anyway, before I even got in my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible, foreboding feeling that was almost telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain. I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare, I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange. I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with the little cage. Going down the street, it was literally only 1 block away from my home that I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought, well, that's got to be the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night. As I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour, it suddenly came out into the street light and walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running, but it wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog, but I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, and so I can confirm was not a wolf. What I saw looked like a humanoid literally hunched over on all fours, back erect in a hunch, moving with pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. Literally looked like a giant wolf head. The being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky. My brain literally froze. Instantly, I began rationalizing, but it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I had just seen. The closest thing I can compare this to would be the werewolf from Harry Potter that Professor Lupin turns into. Link there. All I can think of is, how would they know? That's nearly identical to what this thing looks like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to looking like that exact CGI rendering. On all fours, its backside probably about 4 to 4.5 feet in height. The head higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there was no way this was a bear or other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was nothing familiar about it. To anyone who might say, maybe it was just a really large dog that was sick and hunched. Definitely no. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen. To be over 4 feet in height at the back, not the head, while hunched over. Definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear, as none are this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it could not be denied. You could tell that if it wanted to, it could have easily stood up on 2 legs. What's more insane is that I could feel its energy. The energy was dark, oppressive, and really just a sense of danger swept over me. It had a very otherworldly energy about it. To continue, I slowly continued driving and quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it had gone. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush, looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse, but I can tell you this, when I got home, I ran into my garage and shut that garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked, truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw, they always say. I also know my mind didn't just fill in blanks or hallucinate this. Last night, I looked up stories of dogmen, only to find people's descriptions/drawings were fairly identical to what I had witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I'm convinced it is real. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this. Does anyone know how common Oregon sightings are? And has anyone ever heard of an Oregon coast sighting? I'm also curious if anyone else has ever heard of literally getting sick to your stomach or not feeling well just before the encounter. Third story. Stay out of the Rocky Mountains at night. An Airbnb offer that seemingly was too good to be true caught my eye while planning a long weekend getaway with my friends. It was a 6-bed/room cottage with a gorgeous view in the Rocky Mountains and was only an hour drive out of my city. It'd be cool enough outside at night to warrant the hot tub there, and we'd get a beautiful view of the autumn trees in the daytime. I checked the forecast, 25 degrees Celsius for 3 days straight. The pricing was also good. Splitting between the 6 of us would total $66 each. I showed it to the company I'd be taking, and immediately we booked it. I was the first one to arrive after a scenic drive with winding roads. It was fairly isolated. I couldn't hear the noise pollution from the Trans-Canada Highway like you normally could if you stayed in Banff or Canmore. That also meant I could hear the sounds of any approaching vehicles. I took in the scenery for about 2 minutes before the next car pulled up. It was Nick and Dakota. They lumbered out of Nick's rusty but reliable car. They loosely gripped their belongings with them, which consisted mostly of books and pot. Shall we see if we didn't get swindled with some shite cottage? I asked them. May as well. Nick replied nonchalantly. The outside of the cottage matched the pictures to a T. No doubt it had received immaculate care. The patios were spotless, the hot tub clean and large. The glass didn't have a single smear or spot on it. It was only 1 level, but it was very large from the outside. I noticed Dakota was staring into the trees and keeping himself unusually quiet. Not to your liking? I inquired. It's only a little bit different from BC, Dakota hummed. But it's nice. It'll be good to relax here. Both of them were intelligent, but a bit snobby to a fault. They weren't the easiest to impress, but they both looked out for me, and in turn, I valued their friendship and kept them included in my events. A stiff wind sent chills down my spine, and I could tell Nick and Dakota both felt the cold too. "Let's go inside," I suggested. Getting chilly. The inside was just as extravagant as the outside. The amount of space each area had was on par with miniature mansions. There was a fireplace, lots of couches, and each bed there was a king-sized one. A definite upgrade from my queen-sized bed at home. The three of us called dibs on the first rooms, and I was satisfied with my view of a few mountains that the sun would perfectly set between at night. Not only that, the pantry was chocked full of all sorts of non-perishable food. Funny, I didn't see anything about food being given to us. I told everyone to pack accordingly, so we were going to be filled up in no time. Thumping could be heard in the distance, which alerted me. "You guys hear that too, hey?" I asked Nick. He chuckled. "I think the rest of your friends are here." I peeked out the window as the thumping got louder. He was right. The thumping was coming from the music that Xander, Brandon, and CJ were listening to in CJ's SUV. I could hear them bellowing with enthusiasm from here, hands swinging wildly out of the windows as CJ parked. "Are you ready to feel how old we are?" Dakota asked Nick. "I'm thankful I brought some earplugs," Nick answered. "Should help with these loans." "Come on, guys are not that much older than them," I cooed. "What, 5 years?" Nick and Dakota had just celebrated their 30th birthdays 2 months ago. My 24th was coming up in a week, so this was like a pre-party for that. The other three matched my age. I hopped out of the cottage to greet the others. "I hope you brought your A game and a whole lot of alcohol," I announced, arms open. "Holy shit, this place is nice." CJ gasped, stepping out of the SUV. Brandon and Xander didn't say much, but gave me a pleasant nod as they hauled their coolers inside. "Didn't get swindled. Can't find a flaw here yet," I said, breathing in the fresh air and doing a 360 of my surroundings. "I'm a little cold, though." CJ checked his arms, the hair standing upwards on them. He brooded a little. "Wasn't it supposed to be hot this weekend?" "Yeah, I know, but hey, at least we have a hot tub." "Shit, ain't that the truth?" He went inside with the others. There was a definite difference in my two age groups. Dakota and Nick spent much of their time on the first day smoking weed and reading at the back patio. Xander and Brandon spent much of their time drinking heavily and getting rowdy with each other. They recently had an issue of liking the same girl, who I invited but couldn't attend, who ultimately chose Xander. I noticed them getting into a shoving match, and I held back Xander. CJ got on Brandon. "I don't want to play bouncer with you guys. Wasn't this shit behind you guys?" I said, still holding on to Xander. He was no match, and CJ was easily overpowering Brandon. "Yeah, but this asshat keeps saying how bad I am to her," Xander answered with a labored voice. "It's 'cause you are, man. Kaylee deserves someone who can last more than a minute." Brandon barked back. "Who cares about that we're here to have a good time?" CJ said, giving an extra squeeze on his hold. There was a moment of silence apart from the music that was playing in the living room. We both let go of our squabbling friends, and Brandon left in a huff. "I'm going for a walk. Don't let Rasputin there follow me unless he wants a beating," Brandon yelled, flipping off Xander. Xander stroked his lengthy beard and scoffed. I couldn't help but chuckle. Brandon's description of Xander was accurate. "Hey, you shouldn't be going alone." I called out, but it fell on deaf ears. I sighed, leaving the living room to join Dakota on the patio outside. Dakota offered me a joint, and I gladly accepted it. As I lit it up with him, he gestured over to something I didn't notice while I was inspecting the place before. It was a sign that had been nailed above the door I had just walked out of. "Extreme caution. Do not go out alone at night. They will find you," I read aloud. I turned back to Dakota. "What do you think they are?" Dakota shrugged. "Bears, maybe? It's the pre-hibernation season, after all. Didn't mention it in the ad, did they?" I took a look at the sun. It was about 3 hours before it'd be noticeably dark out. Nick joined the two of us and lit up a joint as well. "Where were you?" Dakota asked. "In my room, trying my hardest not to laugh at Jay's shit friends go at it." Nick sneered. I rolled my eyes. I pondered between my drags. the sign weighing on my mind. Think I should look for Brandon? I finally asked, breaking the silence. Nah, he'll be fine. The trails here don't stretch long, according to the map, Nick said. Let him have his boo-hoo, and he'll be back soon enough. The two older guys always kept me a little grounded, and I was grateful for it. I noticed things were back to normal after I peeked into the window. Xander and CJ were gaming and laughing like they normally do. 2 hours had passed, and Brandon still hadn't returned. I pulled up the ad for the cottage, and nothing in the description had mentioned the sign anywhere. Not even the owners mentioned it in the ad. I sat at the table stirring my dark and stormy. I made for myself glaring at the ad. I must have been glaring hard because Xander slowly approached me, seating himself. Everything all right, man? He asked me. I postured myself up, snapping out my thoughts. Yeah, just weirded out by that sign outside, looking at the ad, and there's not a goddamn thing. Concerned about Brandon going off on his own, you know? Xander raised an eyebrow. A sign. I gestured over to the back entrance, and he went to read it and came back to me. That's awfully weird, he said. Good thing it's just Brandon. But he contributed, man. He's a friend, too. But now I'm nervous that they're going to find me if I go out looking for him. I worried. I'm just trying not to think about it. Xander gave me an assuring pat on the back. How about you don't think about it? And come play some games with CJ and your old folks. I chuckled and proceeded to play some beer pong with the rest of them. Another hour passed, and the 5 of us piled into the hot tub together. We had all drank ourselves in a losing track of time, and I had completely forgotten about Brandon. The sun was basically set, and the view of the stars had me in awe. We had all gotten to shooting the shit when CJ piped up. Where's Brandon? He back yet? There was a pause. I took a deep breath. Brandon? I shouted out, my voice echoing into the mountain range. I shouted some more. Brandon, Brandon, Brandon. Brandon L. Lawrence, get over here. CJ called out into the rocks and trees. We heard what sounded like a warped echo of CJ's voice in the distance. I raised an eyebrow at that, but assumed it was the distance CJ's mighty voice carried. Well, if we're smart, unlike Brandon there, we should be inside by now, Dakota suggested. Keep one of the doors unlocked for him, I guess. A heavy cold breeze hit all of us. It even made the hot tub feel like an ice bath. We all flinched, getting ourselves back into the cottage without a word. The alcohol put us to sleep not long after. Dude, you gotta get up, CJ shook me awake. I turned on a lamp on my bedside table instinctively. I rubbed my eyes awake, looking at CJ. His eyes were wide with fear. He was shaking as he slapped the switch on the lamp. We were plunged back into darkness once again. What the hell, man? I said, sitting myself up. I wrapped my blankets around me. The place was freezing. There's something outside, he said in a frantic, hushed tone. Is it Brandon? I don't think so. Brandon doesn't walk on 4 legs. I got out of bed, shivering like crazy as I threw on some clothes. CJ ushered me to the living room, where the rest of the guys were already up. All of them were on high alert. I lurched over to the group. What's going on? It's like 2 in the morning. I grumpily demanded. Something's walking around. I already told you, CJ hissed. I didn't hear anything like I normally could. What do you think it is, Nick? You heard it first, Dakota asked, sounding much calmer than the others. Probably by Jay's room, Nick grumbled. I started hearing what was outside. It was brushing up against the outside of the house. It took heavy steps. I peeked towards my room as the door cracked open. Oh, I saw a lumbering creature with grizzled fur pass my window. It made a gurgling sound as it passed my open window. Is that a bear? Xander asked. Looks that way, Nick said. Let's wait till it goes away before we head back to bed. Brandon's still not back, CJ said, a little louder. I swear to God if that bear got him. The moving thing outside stopped, then circled back in the other direction at a faster pace. The back door was a glass one, and it wasn't covered up. We were about to see our night terror in the flesh. We all braced, looking for something to defend ourselves with. It was a bear, but something was wrong with it. It was the size of a grizzly, but it had very mangy fur, When the bear tripped the motion light outside, I noticed that one of its paws looked like it had been chewed up. It also had multiple gashes in its side. I could smell the blood from here, and it was foul. Holy shit, what do we do? I whined. I had never seen such a wounded, large beast in front of me before. Wounded animals are dangerous, but what the hell could have wounded a grizzly like that? Stay still, Dakota hissed. It'll piss off soon enough, but if it breaks the glass, we make a break for it. My eyes darted around the room, and when I peered back through the window in my room, I noticed something swaying in the tree lean, more like something crashing through the trees. The bear was walking away from the cottage when I heard the shriek. It damn near popped our eardrums, but I could hear the swift scurrying of something fast approaching from the side. I kicked my door shut, hoping it wouldn't make much noise. That definitely wasn't the bear, Xander groaned, covering his ears. Hi, I yelled, ducking behind the couch instinctively. There was enough room that the couches made cover for all of us. I kept my eyes out looking towards the wounded animal when the carnage unfolded. A long, very bony arm grabbed the bear by the head and snapped its neck. I heard what I could only describe as a giggle coming from whatever did that. The thing stepped more into view. It was gigantic and thin, and when it lowered its head, it had a long mane and a dog-like face. It walked on two legs. Much of its hair draped over its naked, wrinkly body. It began to chew on the bear's head. It peered at us, and CJ pulled my head back behind the couch. Oh God, did it see us? I whispered, nearly crying. What I asked that? CJ cried, doing his best to keep quiet. That's scary, man, Nick whispered, his composure loosening. I hope it's only the bear it's after. Let's keep out of sight. I heard something touch the glass, then drop. It sounded like it was smearing something on the window. I didn't dare look at that. We heard it step around, but eventually it began walking away from the camp. I had to know. I poked my head up from behind the couch and saw it. There were 3 of them now, the 2 newer ones smaller than the first. They dragged the bear behind as they ran away into the mountains on all 4s. None of us moved from our spot, nor did any of us really sleep. We'd periodically check on one another to make sure we were good, but truthfully, none of us were. Some of us contemplated on calling the cops, or the owners of the cottage, but that was objected to for at least the night. It was about 4:30 a.m. when Dakota finally stood up. Guys, he said. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was turning pale. More of us stood up, first Nick, then CJ, then me, then Xander lastly. Is that? CJ slowly asked. I damn near fainted. At the glass door, there was a bloody smear that coated the door from a few feet up to the ground. There was a lump of something on the ground outside. I had hoped it was a chunk of bear, but I was dead wrong. Nick got up and opened the door slowly, and the stench of death wafted into the cottage. Oh shit, he groaned, and proceeded to puke outside around the corner. I was fearful something was going to jump out and maul him to death, but he made it inside quickly. The lump of flesh outside was Brandon's maimed, severed head. We all made it back into town, but I don't dare spending another night at a remote cabin or cottage in the Rockies. You're better off at a hotel in Banff or Canmore. Ideally, you're better off spending the night far from these mountains. Just stay out of the Rockies at night, no matter where. If you're alone, they probably will find you. 4th story, Dogman or Werewolf. I recently seen a post on Facebook of a journalist talking about 2 boys who seen a creature in the county next to the one my family lives in. It got me thinking about a story that happened to my aunt before I was born. My aunt had told me and anyone that asked this story, and no matter what her story never changed ever. She stood on what she saw was real, even if no one believed her. One night she and her boyfriend were driving down the road and were coming up on a railroad track. When they got closer, they saw an 8-foot-tall creature standing on the side of the road. I always remembered her saying it had glowing eyes. Weirdly enough, she always thought it had kind of smirked at her when they drove past. It didn't chase them, try and do anything. It just stood there staring and watching them as they drove past. She had always described it as looking just like the werewolf from Van Helsing. This was before she married my uncle, and I think that experience of hers brought them closer because he had an experience of his own as a child. When he was a kid, he was walking home. At this time, he lived in the country. I'm talking maybe 200 ppl live in this area. I also used to live here, just so you can get an idea of how he felt being the only person outside at this time. He also saw an 8-foot-tall creature that scared him to death. He ran all the way home and busted through the door. He told my grandma what he had saw, and I'm not sure if my grandma believed him or not at the time. I asked her when I got older, and she said he was so terrified that whether she saw it or not, he still saw something that scared him that badly. A few years ago, my uncle started getting into listening to scary stories when he came across the DOGMAN. He has listened to every type of cryptid story on YouTube, and the DOGMAN is the only one he wholeheartedly believes is true. Fifth story, the time I encountered a DOGMAN in the Oregon woods. It was September of 2021. I was on a camping trip in Oregon. I was about an hour away from Klamath Falls, which ironically and infamously also seems to be a hot spot for cryptid sightings, especially the DOGMAN, though I wouldn't discover this till much later. My encounter took place just off of the Lake of the Woods area on the Aspen Point campground side. The Lake of the Woods was in walking distance from me, no more than a few miles. To get to the lake from camp, however, it required that I cut through a small clearing and then a walk through a patch of forest. During the day, the lake was beautiful. Every day for the 4 days I was there, I spent as much time as I could sitting near the lake. It was peaceful. Strange things first occurred on my 3rd day there. I just come back to camp after going out with family. I marched to the lake where I spent the next few hours. I hung around until the weather grew crappy and the sun began to set. I let it almost get too dark before I'd realized I was in an isolated location, with a walk through rural forest ahead of me. If you've been in a similar position, you know I was trying to collect myself while also internally panicking as daylight burned. I began to walk. The forest was thick, however I managed to keep my cool. The clearing was in sight. That's when the most awful feeling came over me. You know the feeling when you can physically feel someone's eyes staring down the back of your neck. Only my someone felt more like a something. I remained frozen like a deer in headlights, sick to my stomach. Up until a few yards behind me, I heard several fallen branches crack simultaneously. I turned my head and peered into the dim woods. Nothing was there. Suspecting LD just experienced some bad omen, panic ensued. I chose flight and raced back to camp with limited vision. Then came my 4th and final night at camp. I found myself rolling around, unable to sleep. In the dead of night, I got up, threw on some warmer clothes, unzipped my tent, and left. What was supposed to be a short bathroom break quickly turned into a late-night solo walk back to the Lake of the Woods. That particular night, a full harvest moon lit my path. It shone just well enough for me to make out my surroundings. Even with the brightness of the moon, I headed for the lake with a flashlight in hand. I walked in the night defiantly, the previous day still heavy on my mind. No forest monster was going to get its hands on me, I told myself. I went into the clearing and through the woods like a madman on a mission, inviting the supernatural. I inevitably reached the lake and sat down on the docks. I watched as the moonlight glistened on the water, dancing in short ripples. However, I began to notice an eerie fog rolling in over the lake. While looking out on the water, something came over me. I realized something was off. I now diverted my attention back towards the trees. The sounds of the forest had gone abruptly silent now, as if in the presence of a predator. And before I knew it, a dreadful feeling came rushing in. My stomach dropped. I shined my flashlight into the darkness and heard more tree branches breaking as if something was headed towards me. Instinctively, I stopped listening to the water and started moving. I wanted to navigate whatever was happening like one would walk on eggshells, but Elle ran. With my flashlight on, I booked it off the docks and into the forest. I ran, clumsily stumbling over roots, ultimately falling and losing my light. As I fell, I saw a black silhouette gunning for me. I got up and full sprinted with only the moonlight to guide me now. Something was hot on my heels. Terrified, I managed to just reach the clearing and turn my back away from the woods. That's when I saw it. It stood up on its hind legs and watched me from the tree line. It must have been 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in matted, jet black fur. Humanoid with the head of a dog. It had lanky limbs, beady eyes, and a malnourished body. And for about 5 seconds, it just watched me. I stood paralyzed for what felt like lifetimes. I watched as it reverted to all 4 legs and ran back into the forest. To say it was fast would be an understatement. It was the quickest thing LVE ever seen. I truly believe it would have caught me that night if it wanted to. As a native of the Pacific Northwest, you hear a lot of strange tales regarding the woods and ocean here. I grew up with many myths and stories. Stories of dreadful black-eyed children, colossal sea monsters resembling prehistoric plesiosaurs, the Native American thunderbird, and of course Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot, the staple cryptid of Oregon and a long-time selling point. Bigfoot's so prominent here, it makes you question how many have seen it. I, however, have only encountered a different kind of creature, a cryptid unlike anything LD heard of until the fateful night I met it. The DOGMAN. 6th story. Dog-headed person. This happened to my brother and I years ago when we were kids. Our mom was the assistant director for the children's choir at our church and would sometimes pick up kids and take them home when they didn't have rides to practice. These siblings we used to take home lived in a neighborhood not far from ours, so we took them home nearly after every practice. So this one night, it was the same as usual. We all piled up in my mom's SUV and took them home after practice. It was dark out by that time, so when we parked in front of their house, my mom would always get out to walk them to the door. My brother and I, as always, stayed in the car. I was in the passenger seat, and he was in the back. Then my brother said the strangest sentence. "There's a man with a dog's head looking out the window." "What?" I said, and then turned to look at him. I thought he was joking. He was looking at the house across the street, so I followed his line of sight. There was indeed a man with a dog's head looking out of the second-story window. I don't even remember saying anything. We just stared. It was completely still and tall figure, wearing dark cloths with the head of a white dog. I remember constantly leaning and squinting in its direction because I wanted to get a clearer look at it. Something about the image was foggy. I knew what I was looking at, and I knew what I saw. But at the same time, it was as if the being was non-corporeal. I don't know, I just felt like if I looked away or even just glanced in a different direction, it would be gone. So I just kept my eyes on it. I wasn't scared, though, just curious and amazed by what I was looking at. It felt like we were staring forever. Then my mom came back in the car and broke the spell. Immediately, we were rushing to tell her to look at the window. She seemed confused and slightly amused by what she probably thought were antics, but she looked anyways. "Where?" she asked. We kept pointing at the window, but she couldn't see it. "Don't y'all know whose house that is?" she said. "An old couple from church lived there." Then she drove off past the house. We watched the window the whole time as we drove past. The dog-headed person was still there, seemingly watching us, but still not moving. We tried to tell our dad and our grandma, and still bothered our mom about it for a while. They listened, but didn't seem too concerned. I knew they thought we were making it up or mistaking something else for what we saw, so we just stopped mentioning it. We hardly even talked about it with each other. Still, each time we went to drop the kids off, I looked at that window to see if it was still there. It never was. I'm 22 now, and the memory is fuzzy. I don't remember the year, the month, or even how old I was. Trying to remember details is like trying to remember a dream. We started the children's choir when I was 8, so I know I was at least 8 to 10 years old. I saw a YouTube video on urban legends recently that mentioned sightings of dog-headed people, and it sparked my need to know about what it was I really saw. So I'm posting this to reach out. If anyone reading this has saw anything similar to what my brother and I saw that night, please leave a comment or message me. Thanks. 7th story. Michigan Dogman? This happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I want to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm/ranch land that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. Needless to say, it made us pretty tough, and it takes a lot to spook us. We are all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the U.S. Navy. He was 6 feet 4 inches, built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. He was home on leave and went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming in the house, shaking and crying, saying he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys hunting my dad. A few male cousins, my uncle, who was still terrified but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken, got all their shotguns and ammunition and saddled the horses to go clear the woods. Apparently they were aware of the dogman, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step outside of our house until they returned. I had never heard my dad or grandfather so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes, and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point because they never stayed in the woods until after dark. Shortly, I heard the sound of the horses running to the barn and their voices. I was so relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law. I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot. I knew it was serious. I overheard the adults talking the next night. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had his sighting bigger than any wolf could make, but they were definitely dog tracks. As I said before, we are avid outdoorsmen and hunters. We can identify tracks easily, but these couldn't be identified. About 8 feet up in a tree were claw marks. No one my bear could make those. We also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout our property. Had cattle mutilated and not in the way a coyote or bear would, and it lasted that whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, all of them mutilated. All with the same wolf/dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows, he did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and OEF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, before he committed suicide. After that experience, though, he was never the same. He went from not ever drinking to never seeing him without a bottle of Jack, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality and never went out in the woods again. He quit hunting, and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe he saw something out there, and it ultimately killed him. 8th story. Stay out of the Ozarks. I've been a biologist ever since I was 22 years old. I grew up on a farm in rural Illinois, so nature has never been a stranger to me. Playing in the woods was how I entertained myself growing up. Spending all my time in a forest as a child, people expect me to have stories about Bigfoot or strange noises or finding some weird shrine out in the middle of the woods. But no. The weirdest thing I ever encountered was a bobcat screeching. It sounded just like a woman's dying scream. And yes, to everyone who's ever claimed to hear a skinwalker or goatman screeching in the woods at night, I promise you, it was just a bobcat. The truth is often mundane and disappointing. You'd think this would mean I'd have gotten bored of the woods, but I never really lost my love for them. Nature is boring. That's why I like it. You know what to expect. That's why, after college, I decided to make studying nature my full-time career. I'm a biologist for the Sierra Club, specialized in the ecosystems of Midwestern America. Fish, birds, deer, elk, bear, wolves, the like. I've spent weeks in fire towers, cabins, campsites, always miles away from civilization. I'm usually gathering data on local wildlife, measuring for pollutants, determining whether the ecosystem is stable or if anything threatens it. The work is not glamorous, but I enjoy it, and nature had still never surprised me. Until my last assignment. I was designated to be stationed, alone, in a cabin in the Ozarks. The assignment was supposed to last 3 weeks in May. The Sierra Club was alerted to a steady decline in the local elk population over the last decade. Nothing drastic, but enough to raise concern. My job was to take census of the wildlife, measure for pollutants, the usual. These are my diary entries for my assignment, starting with my first night. I arrived in the evening in early May. Nothing was amiss the first 2 nights. It seemed an assignment like any other. The sounds of the forest were exactly what you'd expect. Crickets, an owl's hoot, and the occasional elk call. I was sent here in May because that's their mating season. The elk are out and about looking for, dates, and that makes them easy to count. Elk mating is pretty straightforward. The female lets out a call and waits for a male to find her. Usually it's first come, first served, if you catch my drift. If only, right? It was clear that love was in the air, and for all the calling, you'd think I would start seeing elk. But by the second day, I still hadn't spotted a single one. The third night, I was lying awake in bed, uneasy. Something wasn't sitting right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I was about to nod off when a female call cut through the night. I sighed. That was the second time that night I'd heard her. What? Are the fellas having a guy's night in or something? And that's when it finally hit me. I shot bolt upright in bed. For the last 3 nights, I had heard nothing but female mating calls. That should have drawn every male within half a mile. Now elk are not discreet, and they don't beat around the bush. When that male gets to the female, well, let's just that the whole forest will know about it. I sat in bed, staring out into the night, pondering. There have to be males close enough to hear this female. So after 3 nights of her calls, why haven't I heard the main event? The third day, I went out onto the trails, once again looking for some sign of elk in the forest. What I found was not encouraging. About a quarter mile from my cabin, I was trekking down the trail when I noticed something 30 feet into the woods. A large, brown, fuzzy mass lying in the brush. I smiled. An elk taking a midday nap? I took out my binoculars to get a closer look. It was an elk, all right. But my smile dropped when I realized that the brown, fuzzy mass was completely still. I carry a hunting rifle with me for safety. I readied it and approached the elk carefully. It looked fine from where I was standing, but I nearly dropped my rifle when I rounded to the animal's front. It was carnage. The poor creature had been completely gutted. What little remained of its entrails hung loosely out of its chest cavity. The ribs had been pulled apart, and huge claw marks scarred its flank. Its head was barely connected to its body by a few weak strands of flesh. I heaved and almost lost what little breakfast I'd had. It was horrifying. I had to take a few moments to collect myself. This was the first time that nature had surprised me. What could have possibly done this? I've studied wildlife for years. This was a bull elk in its prime. It would have stood 9 feet tall alive, a king of the forest. There is no predator on this continent that could have taken down a full-grown bull, pack or no pack. Even a grizzly wouldn't mess with something this big. And bears are mostly scavengers anyway. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to think of an explanation. Maybe it had been sick. Maybe a predator came upon it in its sleep, took it by surprise. Yes, that must be it. It couldn't have fought back. But this savagery, those claw marks were bigger than even a grizzly's. In its ribs, no quadruped could have exerted leverage on the ribs to split them like that. You would need arms. A chilling thought occurred. A human? Could humans have done this? But why? Hunters would skin it, or take the head at least, to mount on their wall. Is some psychopath out here dismembering wildlife for fun? And that still wouldn't explain those gruesome claws. Whatever this was, it needed to be reported. I was sent here to investigate the elk population declining, and this had to be related. I fished out my camera to take photos. Having to document the horror from every angle was heart-wrenching. The look in its eyes. This elk had been terrified when it died. I want to take one last shot. Just as the shutter clicked, my ears registered something. A sound from behind me that my camera had nearly drowned out. I whipped around. I had barely heard it, but it was there, a twig snapping. My camera hung from my neck and my rifle from my shoulder. I dropped the one to snatch up the other. Idiot, I thought to myself as I pointed the rifle towards the sound. I had been so shaken by the sight of the body, I had completely overlooked one important fact. The kill was fresh. This corpse hadn't even begun to decay. This elk had been dead no more than half a day, and that means whatever killed it may still be nearby. With my rifle still trained on the spot, I backed away towards the trail. My hike back to the cabin was the only time in my life I felt scared of the forest. Trees surrounding me on all sides, no visibility. I jumped at the slightest sounds, never lowering my rifle, never going more than 5 seconds without looking behind me. I felt like prey, never knowing where the danger would come from or when. I didn't relax until my cabin door was closed and locked behind me. I spent the rest of my day inside the cabin, shaken. I readied the photos and sent them to my supervisors. They would take a day or two to respond. Until then, my plan was to investigate during the day and with my rifle ready. That night was my last night at the cabin. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a female elk call again. The first one that I'd heard that day. And close, very close. Wildlife don't like buildings. They smell of fire and metal and gasoline, all unnatural to them. They steer clear. What was this elk doing so close to my cabin? I peered out my window into the dark of the forest. No sign of her. She must have been beyond the tree line. I grabbed my rifle. Of course, I wasn't going to shoot the elk, but I might send a few shots into the air to scare her off. It would be nice to know the elk are breeding normally, but I could do without front row seats. I unlocked my cabin and took a step out onto my porch, rifle still in hand. My eyes scanned the tree line, looking for the female. That's when a pair of antlers struck out from behind a tree. An elk's head followed them and turned peer right out at me. But this was a buck, probably attracted by the female's calls. This was promising, but all the more reason to scare them away. I raised my rifle to the sky and prepared to fire. That was when the elk flew into the air. Or its head did. The buck's head sailed in an arc towards me and landed just feet away from my door. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Something or someone had been holding the head and had just thrown it. I nearly pissed myself in fear. I pointed my rifle at the tree where the buck's head had appeared. The light from my cabin barely reached. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Had I just seen claws retreat around trunk? I was frozen. I needed to reach behind me to open my door and get back inside. But I was too scared to turn my back on the forest or even take a hand off of my rifle. After a few seconds, I finally gathered up the nerve to brace the rifle against my shoulder, my finger still on the trigger. I groped behind me until my left hand found the doorknob, never taking my eyes off the tree. Thank God the door had not locked behind me. With my left hand, I turned the knob and pushed open the door, then drew it back to my rifle. I backed away quickly into the cabin, slamming the door and locking it. I hurried to the windows, drawing all my blinds and making sure each was locked, never letting my rifle out of arm's reach. The terror I felt as I approached each window, never knowing if there would be someone or something on the other side of the glass staring back at me. There hadn't been, which was almost as unnerving. I rushed to the satellite phone to call the sheriff's office at the base of the mountain. The relief I felt when they picked up. "You need to get up here," I pleaded. "Who is this?" It was the sheriff's deputy on the other end. I'd met him and the sheriff before beginning my stay at the cabin. "It's me. I'm the guy stationed up at the cabin on the mountain." "Oh, sorry about that. What's the problem?" "There's someone up here with me." "Get up here now." Whoa. Slow down. You mean like kids or something?" "No, it is not kids. Someone up here just threw a decapitated elk head at my cabin." In my panic, I'd somehow kept the awareness to use the phrase someone instead of something. I didn't want this guy to think I was drunk or crazy. I just needed him to get up here. What do they look like? How many were there? Did they have guns? I have no idea, man. They killed a goddamn elk, cut the head off, and threw it in my cabin. Just get the hell up here. Oh shit. Okay. Lock yourself in there. We're on our way. Man, please stay on the line. I'm scared here. I really was terrified. I wanted someone to stay on the phone with me, even if it couldn't help me. The man replied, I can't get to you and stay on the line at the same time. I'm calling the sheriff now. We're on our way. Just lock yourself in and stay there. The man hung up. I swore. I was alone again. A female elk call rang out again. This time it was even closer. It sounded like it was right outside now. I took up my rifle again. That's when the tapping started. While I was talking to the deputy, I hadn't been watching the windows. The sound was coming from the window to the right of my front door. My eyes widened in horror. A single gray claw was tapping on the right edge of the window. Just one claw. Whatever it was attached to wanted to stay out of sight. The claw stopped tapping. Instead, it drew itself along the window and out of my sight, leaving a long, ugly scratch. The sound was horrible, but it didn't stop when it left the window. I could still hear it, dragging along the wooden walls of my cabin. The creature was scratching through solid wood. Could it break through my windows? Why didn't it? My knees shook. I tracked the sound of the scratching with my rifle. My mind raced. Could this thing get in? How long until the sheriff showed up? I was high up on the mountain. The drive up here took 45 minutes. Even if they hurried, it might be a half hour. Even if they did get here, could they stop this thing? Should I make a run for my truck? No. Whatever that thing was, it could get to me before I got the truck up and running. Something nagged at the back of my head, but I could barely think. The scratching was louder and louder. Whatever this thing was, it had torn a bull elk to shreds. How could I stop it? The bull. That's when I realized it. The head. It was the same head as the bull I'd seen earlier. It had the same scar down its right cheek. This thing was taunting me. It must have been there when I found the dead elk. It had been watching me, and now it had thrown the head at me. Was it telling me to go away? To get out of its territory? I gasped. With my mind racing, I hadn't noticed that the scratching had stopped. Where was that thing? My eyes darted from window to window. No sign of it, until the loud thud right above me. It's on the goddamn roof, I thought. Its footsteps echoed through my cabin. Between each step came rhythmic taps, no doubt from its claws. Was it testing for weaknesses? Was it merely toying with me? It had only been a few minutes since I called the sheriff's office. I was still far from safety. I hadn't moved since the call. The thing on my roof thudded from spot to spot. The shock was starting to wear off. Focus. Think. I told myself. The thing had probably seen me through my window. It was right above me. The bathroom. The bathroom was the safest spot. There were no windows. If it does break in, it will have to look for me, then break through the bathroom door. That might buy me an extra minute, and it might save my life. The creature knew where I was. I had to try to change that. I slowly slipped off my shoes. Keeping my rifle trained on the roof, I kicked a shoe towards my bed. Sure enough, the thuds on my roof followed, stopping right above the spot where my shoe had landed. It's tracking me. I slowly shuffled to the bathroom, not raising my feet, afraid to make a sound. Praying that the door would not creak, I opened the bathroom, preparing to lock myself inside. I was shutting myself in, hoping that I wouldn't die in this bathroom, when I heard a loud scratch, followed by a dull thud. It had jumped off the roof. It was on the ground again, outside the cabin. Why? Was it going away? I was afraid to hope that maybe it had gotten bored. Maybe it had found some other prey. That was when I heard the woman scream. I gasped and covered my mouth. How is that possible? No one else is up here. A hiker? A camper, maybe? The scream came again. Help, she cried out. I gripped my rifle, crying now. I was frozen in fear. That thing was out there, chasing some poor woman, and I was too cowardly to help her. I just wanted to stay in that bathroom, hiding, hoping that every second the thing spent chasing that woman was another second closer to the sheriff getting here. I don't know how long I sat there, cowering. Another, more desperate scream. Help me. There was something in her terror. She was more scared than I was. And there I sat, letting her die. My shame overcame my fear. I gripped my rifle tighter and left the bathroom. I marched to the door, ready to face whatever this creature was. Maybe I could distract it. By time for her to get away. Maybe the sheriff would find her, even if the thing got me first. Just as I was reaching for the doorknob, she cried out again. A pain, dying scream. I was too late. That thing had gotten to her. I was a coward. And because of that, she was dead. The woman moaned in pain, this time just a few meters away from my door. This must be her final moments. And I listened, safe in my cabin. She groaned once more. But this sounded different somehow. It was... My eyes widened in shock and realization. I drew my hand from the doorknob, as if it had burned me. I had never unlocked it. Thank God. The moan came again. This time, unmistakable. That was not a moan of pain or terror. It was an entirely different kind of moaning. I backed away from the door. You motherfucker, I muttered. You almost got me. It all made sense now. There never was any female elk. Mimicry is a common adaptation in all ecosystems, both for prey and for predators. This thing, it let out female elk cries to draw in males. And then, well, I had already seen the result in the forest. That's why I never heard the elk mating. There was no female waiting for them, only this monster. And now it was trying the same tactic on me. I nearly sobbed in terror. It had tried to lure me with the sound of a woman in distress. It thought that might draw me out. When that didn't work, it switched to its tried-and-true method, a mating call. I aimed my rifle at the door. The moans continued, louder and more intense, building into a climax. I was nauseous at the thought of whatever was out there, squatting in the dark, mouth agape, emitting this perversion of a woman's voice, trying to draw me out into the dark and rip me apart just like that elk. I stood with my rifle trained at the door, not moving. I had resolved that I was going to stand there until the sun rose or until the sheriff came, and the moment I saw this thing, I was going to shoot it. I don't know how long I stood there among the echoes of that sick creature. Eventually, the moans puttered out, and I was left in silence, until the tapping began again, in the same spot as before. There it was, that single gray claw, tapping on that same spot where it had scratched the glass. But then a second claw joined it, then a third. It drummed them along the glass. Slowly, ever so slowly. A patch of gray poked out from the edge of the window. Time stopped, and the creature brought its face into full view. It was terrible, like a sloth, but its mouth and nose were caked in blood. It had tiny, beady eyes front-facing, a predator's eyes. Large, pointed ears, almost like a bat. Thin, cracked lips. The monster looked right into my eyes. It cocked its head, and then it pulled those terrible, bloody lips back into a smile. Its razor-sharp teeth, still stained with blood and flesh. I'll never forget them. It pointed that hideous grin at me as it drummed those claws on my window. Shoot, 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 I told myself. But I was frozen. This thing was going to kill me. Light poured through the front window. The monster disappeared out of sight. The sheriff and deputy had arrived in their truck. The two of them sauntered up to my porch and knocked. I had to shake myself out of my stupor and open the door. Both of them backed off and drew their weapons at me, screaming at me to put the gun down. I was still in shock. I think the only thing that kept them from shooting me was the terrified look in my eyes. They asked me what the hell was going on. I could barely speak. I just kept frantically repeating that they needed to get inside, that it was still out there. They eventually told me to come with them down to the sheriff's station. At first, I refused to leave the cabin. They sort of half-dragged, half-walked me to the truck. They said I was like an owl the whole ride down, my head on a swivel, always scanning the tree line for it. I must have fallen asleep after I got to the station. I woke up the next morning in a cell. I was confused and disoriented. I nearly wept from fear when I finally remembered everything I had been through the night before. The sheriff and deputy sat me down in a room and asked me what the hell happened that night. I was silent at first. I didn't know what to tell them. If I told the truth, they'd think I was crazy. They asked me about the elk's head that I'd told them about during the call. It was gone when they got there. Just a bloody stain on the ground where it had been lying. I made up a story. Said that some kids were prowling around my cabin, making noises, trying to scare me. I called the sheriff's office because I thought I saw one of them with a gun. The sheriff only made me go over the story once. He seemed satisfied. He took me back up there the next day to collect my stuff. In broad daylight, of course. Sure enough, there were deep scratch marks along the side of the cabin. The sheriff didn't look at me. "Kids," he said. We collected my things quickly and hurried back down the mountain. I reported to my supervisors that it was probably overhunting causing the population decline. They would never believe the truth. The sheriff saw me off while I was waiting for the bus to take me back home. He shook my hand and drew me in for one of them manly half-hugs. He gripped my shoulder. "Don't come back," he whispered. I gave him a confused look. He stared me right in the eyes. "It knows you now. Has your scent. Seen your face. Heard your voice. You got away once. It won't happen again. So don't ever come back." That was years ago. I burned the clothes that I had worn that trip, so there's no way they'd end up near the Ozarks again. Never been back anywhere near the Ozarks. And anyone who's ever asked me, I always tell them to steer clear. I've spent so much time trying to forget what I saw that night. But that face, I remember every detail. It's kept me up so many nights with so many questions. What the hell was it? Some freak of nature, a mutant that somehow survived past infancy? Something supernatural? An alien? Those ears, perfectly crafted to detect minute sounds just like a bat. That explains its mimicry. It grew up in that forest, hearing the elk calls. After a while, it learned to copy them. I've spent so many nights asking myself, how? How did it know a woman's voice? I dread to ponder the answer. When sleep finally comes, I have nightmares. Nightmares about campers sitting around their fire when all of a sudden they hear a voice calling out to them from the woods, crying for help. The voice in my nightmares, calling them into the darkness of the trees, away from the safety of their fire. The voice, my voice. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.